I knew something was wrong the second I touched the doorknob. Not because of some dramatic gut feeling or sixth sense, not because the air felt heavy or the sky had turned an ominous shade of gray. It was something simpler, more ordinary than that. Silence. Our house was never silent at that hour. There was always something making noise. The TV muttering in the background, the dishwasher humming, his phone on speaker while his mother's voice poured into our living room like she paid half the mortgage. That night, nothing. No clinking dishes, no show theme song, no soft sound of his laugh from down the hall, no hi babe floating toward the front door, just stillness. I pushed the door open, the hinges making a sound that suddenly felt too loud, and saw it immediately. My suitcase, by the door, packed. Not the haphazard, I'm rushing to the airport at 5 a.m. kind of packed. This was deliberate, thoughtful, in the worst possible way. Clothes folded, shoes paired, my toiletries bag zipped closed and set gently on top. Someone had gone through my drawers and my closet, my side of the bathroom, and made decisions about what was coming with me and what wasn't. It was like walking in on the aftermath of a burglary where the thief had been polite enough to arrange your things before taking them. My husband stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his weight leaned back against the kitchen doorway. His face was set in an expression I knew from argument, but this time it was emptier, cleaner, like he'd already decided exactly how this conversation would go and had no intention of letting reality interfere. He wasn't looking at me like his wife. He was looking at me like a problem he'd finally found the courage to solve. Okay, what is this? I asked. My voice came out too bright, too hot. I glanced from the suitcase to his face, waiting for some twisted version of, "We're going on a surprise trip." He didn't come closer. He didn't even pretend. "My mom was right about you. You need to leave." I let out a short disbelief. "What? Stop. What are you talking about?" Most of our fights started a common sigh. They built in layers, circling the same topic we never really resolved. This was different. There was no warm-up, no transit, just the finals of a play I hadn't. He repeated him slower, enunciating each word. "To leave. My heart. Leave? What are you saying? Where? Why? What did I supposedly do now?" He took a breath. His chest rise and falling. "Practice. Don't play. My mother, I know. I'm not gonna let you respect my family." There it was. Not I saw. Not I found. Not I feel. Like my mother shook. I felt the floor as if the house itself had shifted, and that once told me this wasn't about something that had happened. This was about something that had happened long before I ever showed you. "What?" I asked. My throat felt. "Say it. What exactly?" He pushed off the door frame and stepped. His jaw was clenched so hard, a little muscle in his cheek jumped. "Messages about the way you talk about the way you've been trying." "You think I don't see it? But I'm not stupid. She warned me about women like you from the beginning. Women like you. It's funny, in a sick way, how fast a person can shift you out of love of my life and into a category, a type, a cautionary tale." "I haven't done anything to you," I said, my hands lifting slightly, palms open like I could catch the accusations and hand them back. "I've set boundaries with your mother. Yes. I've asked for privacy. Yes. That's not some big conspiracy. That's a marriage. That's normal." His eyes flashed. "There you go," he said, "always attacking her, always making this about my mom. You've never respected her. You've been trying to turn me against her since day one." That wasn't true, not in the way he meant it, but standing there, it hit me that truth didn't really matter anymore. Not to him, not where she was involved. What mattered was the story that had been slowly, steadily delivered to him for years. The saintly, sacrificing mother, locked in a silent war with the ungrateful, manipulative wife trying to steal her son. "Where is this coming from?" I whispered. "What did she say now?" He shook his head, disgusted. I'm done defending you. I'm done ignoring the signs. She told me to protect myself before it's too late. I talked to a lawyer. The divorce papers are already being prepared. It took a moment for that to land. Already? The words scraped out of me. You already talked to a lawyer? Without even talking to me first? I didn't need to, he said. She showed me enough. I should have listened to her sooner. That was the part that hurt worse than the threat of divorce. The realization that this moment, the suitcase, the hard eyes, the line already drawn, wasn't some emotional outburst. It was a conclusion. This was a choice he'd been creeping toward, inch by inch, with every conversation where he weighed my words against hers and decided hers sounded safer. Every time he brought her into our fights instead of leaning into me. Every time he let her concerns outweigh my reality. Our marriage hadn't been just him and me for a long time. It had been him and his mother and the version of me they crafted together late at night on phone calls I wasn't on. I'm not leaving because your mother told you a story, I said quietly. The tears burned, but I held his gaze. If you want me gone, you look me in the eye and tell me you believe her more than you believe your wife. Say that out loud. He stared at me for a long second, long enough for a tiny, irrational part of me to hope he'd crack, that I'd see even a flicker of doubt. I do, he said. 3 syllables. That's all it took to redraw the map of my entire life. In that instant, I stopped being his partner and became his problem, his opponent, the enemy in a war I hadn't declared. My hands shook as I bent to grab the suitcase handle. The weight of it felt disproportionate, like someone had slipped bricks between my folded shirts. Our years together, our plans, our stupid little inside jokes, all of it, boiled down to what could fit in a carry-on and a cardboard box. I stepped out into the night, the door clicking shut behind me, thrown out of my own life on the strength of one woman's lies and one man's loyalty to them. What none of them knew then was this. The divorce they were already celebrating in their minds as my punishment, the righteous cleansing of their family line, would not unfold the way they imagined. It wouldn't just end my marriage. It would turn their world upside down. If you had met us in the beginning, you wouldn't have predicted any of this. You would have seen 2 people moving through a small, shared world with familiarity and ease. On weeknights, we flowed around each other in the kind of practiced choreography that only comes from time. Him at the stove, me rinsing vegetables, me on the couch with my laptop, him leaning against the counter, telling me about some absurd thing his coworker said. Our evenings usually ended with the same scene, a streaming show murmuring in the background, 2 sets of feet tangled under a shared blanket, comfortable silence interrupted occasionally by, "Did you see that?" or "Rewind, I missed it." We had a shared online calendar that looked like a colorful Tetris game. Blue was his work stuff. Green was mine. Yellow was our us event. Double dates, movie nights, weekend trips, a friend's wedding out of town. We had pink for future ideas, houses we liked, trips we wanted to save for, vague notes like maybe Italy, fall. We rarely looked at those pink notes, but just knowing they were there made me feel like our life was headed somewhere together. We had rituals. Saturday mornings, we took turns making coffee and bringing it back to bed, then passed my phone back and forth, scrolling through real estate listings we definitely couldn't afford, and laughing at the ones with absurd staging. "Look at this one," he'd say. "Why is there a bathtub in the living room?" "Maybe that's the vibe we're missing," I'd joke. Open concept bathing. Sundays were for meal prep. We turned the kitchen into a 2-person assembly line. He chopped onions and garlic. I portioned rice into containers. He marinated chicken while I taped handwritten labels on lids. We moved so easily around each other that we'd joke we should audition for some cooking show as the married couple who can actually share a kitchen without killing each other. We talked about careers, promotions, annoying coworkers. We talked about trips we might take when things slow down. We talked about kids in a tentative, half-serious way, less like we were planning and more like we were warming our mouths to the idea of the word parent. We weren't perfect. We argued about stupid things, how he loaded the dishwasher, how I left half-empty glasses in every room like a trail, whose turn it was to take the car in for an oil change. But we always found our way back to the couch, the show, the blanket. From the outside, and often from the inside, it looked like a solid, ordinary, good marriage. Except there was always someone else in the room. Even when she wasn't physically present, she was there. In his pocket, on his screen, in his phrases, his mother. She'd been part of the story from before we were even official. Our first date ended with him pulling out his phone as soon as he got to his car. "Sorry," he'd said, grinning. "My mom gets anxious. I have to text her that I'm alive." I remember thinking it was sweet, if a little intense. A grown man checking in after a date. Proof, I told myself, that he came from a loving, involved family. When we became official, she added me on social media within hours. Her first message was a barrage of heart emojis and "welcome to the family." It felt like being accepted into some enthusiastic club. When we moved in together, she insisted on helping us unpack. She arrived with 3 casseroles, a label maker, and opinions about where everything should go. "I know how he likes things," she said, laughing as she rearranged our kitchen. "He's a creature of habit." At the time, I took it as invasive affection. She cared. She wanted to support us. That's what I told myself, and anyone else who raised an eyebrow when I mentioned how often she called, because she called a lot. Morning check-ins. "Did you sleep okay? How's your day looking, honey?" Afternoon updates. "Just thinking about you. Have you eaten?" Evening debriefs. "So, tell me everything. How was work? How's she doing? What did you have for dinner?" In the background of my life, her voice became part of the soundtrack. I'd be in the other room and hear him laughing, saying things like, "Yeah, she's right here," or "No, Mom, we're not starving," or "I'll ask her." Sometimes it annoyed me. Sometimes it reassured me. Mostly, I folded it into a story about them being close. Better that than some emotionally distant man whose mother lived in another state and only called once a year, right? When she weighed in on our honeymoon destination, subtly criticizing our choice because it was too far and too expensive for a first marriage trip, I forced myself to smile and say, "We'll think about it," even though we'd already booked it. When she suggested we look for a place close to her because family support is everything, I swallowed the knot in my stomach and interpreted it as love, not control. Whenever my discomfort bubbled up, I smoothed it down with the same sentence. "That's just how they are." Now, of course, I'd use different words. Enmeshment, emotional dependence, a blurring of boundaries that left almost no space for me as an independent person in his life. But back then, I didn't have that vocabulary. I just had vague unease and the sense that maybe the problem was me, that if I were more easygoing, more chill, I wouldn't be bothered by a mother who texted my husband 3 times during a movie night to ask if he'd taken his vitamins. It was in small moments I should have paid more attention to. "Let me ask my mom," he'd say, about things that, to me, seemed firmly in our territory. "Let me ask my mom about whether we could travel over a certain holiday. Let me ask my mom about a job opportunity in another city. Let me ask my mom about whether we should buy the more expensive couch. Each time, I told myself, he just respects her opinion. That's what close families do. Each time, I pushed down the question that whispered, "And what about respecting yours?" Over time, her input stopped feeling like input and started acting like policy. If she thought a decision was bad, he bristled, stalled, or reversed course. If she approved, doors flew open. It wasn't that he never disagreed with her, but those disagreements were quiet, rare, and always followed by long phone calls and heavy sighs. I started to notice that our conflicts had an invisible third participant. When he and I argued about money or holidays or how much information he shared with his family, I'd hear echoes of her words in his responses. Mom says, Mom thinks, Mom's just worried. At first, I focused on the content, that she was worried about me working too hard, or concerned we were rushing into buying a house, or afraid we were isolating ourselves. It took me longer to realize the deeper problem. My husband had outsourced large parts of his emotional processing to his mother. If something bothered him about me, she knew before I did. If a tiny crack appeared in our relationship, she saw it through his confessions before we even named it together. She knew about my long hours at work, about our sex life, about the conversations we had in bed with the lights off, not in vague terms, in detail. And because I desperately wanted to be part of the family, I convinced myself this was the cost of admission. I didn't see yet how that open line would become the channel for something far more poisonous. The shift didn't come as a lightning strike. It came as a slow change in weather. The first clouds looked harmless. Comments, jokes, stories his mother told that I brushed off as old-fashioned or just her way. She had a talent for the backhanded compliment. To my face, she'd say things like, "You're so independent. Not many women your age work as hard as you do." It would be followed inevitably by a soft little warning. Just make sure you're not making him feel unneeded. Men need to feel needed, you know. I'm only saying it because I want you both to be happy. Or, you're very outspoken, good for you. Some men don't like that. But my son is very patient. As if loving me was an endurance sport. When we were alone, her and my husband without me, her tone was different, sharper. I didn't hear those conversations in real time, of course, but I heard their ghosts later. She had a library of cautionary tales about ungrateful wives and gold diggers. There was the cousin whose wife bled him dry and then ran off. The neighbor who stopped cooking the second she got the ring. The colleague's son whose wife used him to get a house and then left laughing. Each story ended the same way, with her shaking her head, eyes full of maternal fear. "I just pray that never happens to you," she'd say. "I would never forgive myself if I didn't warn you." At the time, I wasn't in those stories by name, but I was there in shape, ambitious, opinionated, not financially dependent, not endlessly deferential, the kind of woman who, in her mind, was already halfway to walking out. When I rolled my eyes about it in private, I framed it as generational. She's conservative. She's from a different time. I told myself my job was to respect that without letting it define us. What I didn't understand was that my husband wasn't just hearing her words. He was absorbing them, filing them away as filter. I only realized how deep they'd sunk when they came back out of his mouth. It happened one night when I brought up money. I'd gotten a promotion and a raise, and I thought it was the perfect time to rebalance how we handled our finances. "I want us to feel like a team with money," I said. "Not like you're carrying everything, or I'm carrying everything. Can we look at how we're splitting things and maybe make it more even or put more into savings together. I was nervous. Money talks always made my stomach flutter, but I'd rehearsed this carefully. I wasn't blaming him. I wasn't accusing him. I was inviting him. He went quiet. Not the thoughtful kind of quiet, the kind that feels like the room is filling with something invisible. Later, seemingly out of nowhere, he snapped, "You know, sometimes I feel like you're just waiting for me to get comfortable so you can take half of everything if this goes wrong." I stared at him. What? Where is that coming from? He shot back with a line I had heard before, just not from him. There are women who see a good man and think of him as a retirement plan. I'm not stupid. I could picture the exact moment his mother had said it. Sunday dinner, some distant acquaintance's divorce, his mother's spoon scraping the bottom of a casserole dish as she declared, "Women like that, they just see a good man as a retirement plan." He'd nodded then, casual, like they were discussing the weather. I hadn't realized it was a sentence he'd one day turn on me. After another unannounced drop-in from her, this one during a lazy Sunday where we were both in ratty pajamas, I finally cracked. "I love your mom," I said gently, "but we need a little warning before she comes over. This is our home. I need to know I can relax without someone just walking in." What I was talking about was privacy and agency. Feeling safe in my own living room, the basic right to know who might see me with my hair thrown up and last night's mascara under my eye. What came back to me a few days later was something else entirely. "My mom feels like you don't respect her," he said, brows drawn. "She thinks you're trying to push her out of my life." She said, "A wife who truly loves her husband loves his family too. She doesn't make him choose." Is that what you're doing? Making me choose? Those words, "a wife who truly loves her husband," had come out of his mother's mouth months earlier during a rant about a different daughter-in-law who didn't host enough family gatherings. I remembered sitting there, watching her dramatize this other woman's supposed crimes, never imagining that script would be lifted, rewound, and played back to accuse me. This was triangulation, though I didn't know the term then. Instead of addressing her discomfort with me directly, she passed it to him. Instead of saying, "I feel hurt when," she said, "You should watch out," because she installed herself as the wise, loving observer and cast me as the danger he was too naive to see. He thought he was forming his own opinions. In reality, he was echoing hers. As these stories piled up, his behavior shifted in subtle but chilling ways. He started testing me. "Let me see your phone," he said casually one evening, reaching for it when I set it down. "Why?" I laughed, handing it over. "Looking for my amazing playlist?" He smiled, but the way he held onto it a little too long, the way his eyes flicked over the screen faster than someone just scrolling for music, I felt something curdle in my stomach. When I walked back into the room, he was in my messages. Not in one thread, not looking for something specific, just browsing. "Hey," I said sharply, "what are you doing?" "If you have nothing to hide, why does it bother you?" he shot back. "Mom says people who freak out about privacy are the ones hiding something." Later, I would learn the context. His mother had told him that these days you can't really know anyone, and that if a woman guarded her phone, that's your red flag right there. Suddenly, my basic expectation of privacy was downgraded to evidence. He began asking where I'd been with a new kind of intensity. "You said you were with Sarah." "Which Sarah? You left work at 5. Why are you only home now? How come you didn't answer my call on your break?" The tone wasn't curious. It was investigative. Cross-examination, not conversation. If a male coworker commented something friendly on my social media, I could feel the air tighten around us. "So this is the guy you're always laughing with," he'd say, scrolling through the man's profile. "He's literally married with 2 kids," I'd respond. "We work 3 desks apart. Mom says that's how it starts." he muttered once. Office stuff. He'd never used to talk like that. Those weren't his fears. They were imported, packaged, and gifted to him as protection by the one person he trusted more than any. From the outside, it might have looked like he'd just become jealous or controlling, but from where I stood, I could see the ghostwriter. His mother didn't need to scream, "Leave her." All she had to do was plant doubts wrapped in concern. "I just don't want you to get hurt. I'm only saying this because I love you. I hope I'm wrong about her." By the time the worst accusations came, the soil had been fertilized for years. He stopped hearing what I actually said. Instead, he held my words up against her stories and checked for a match. Was I tired and quiet after a long day with his family? That became cold, rude, and making his mother feel unwelcome. Did I ask for a small change in our finances? That became scheming, using him, and setting myself up to leave. Did I suggest we spend a holiday differently just 1 year? That became trying to erase tradition and cut him off from his roots. The cruelest part wasn't just that he believed these versions, it was that he believed them so completely. He stopped realizing there were other versions at all. There came a point where I realized I wasn't really arguing with my husband anymore. I was arguing with his mother, wearing his face. The first major explosion was after what I thought was an uneventful Sunday dinner at her house. We'd done the usual routine, arrived with a dessert, complimented the food, listened to the same family stories she always told. I'd asked about her garden, helped with the dishes, laughed at appropriate moments. On the drive home, I was in that post-social fog, tired but relieved. We'd gotten through another evening without any landmine. The minute the car doors shut in our driveway, he turned to me, jaw stiff. "Why are you always so cold to my mother?" I laughed, certain I'd misheard. "What? I wasn't cold. I was polite." He stared at me like I'd just told the boldest lie. "Don't gaslight me," he snapped. "She told me how you really were. You barely spoke to her. Your eyes when she tried to help you in the kitchen. She said she felt like a stranger in her own son's." I replayed the night security sorting, asking how she'd been feeling, smiling through a headache. I hadn't rolled my eyes. I knew I hadn't, but his certainty punched a hole in my recollection. "That's not what happened," I said slowly. "I was tired, yes, but I wasn't rude. I didn't roll my eyes at her." He shook his head. "My mother wouldn't make that up," he said evenly. "She said she's tried everything to connect with you, and you keep shutting her out. Why would she lie about that?" There it was, laid out for the first time. My mother wouldn't lie. Underneath, the unspoken corollary, "so you must be." That tiny crack in my certainty. That's how gaslighting starts. Not with someone screaming, "You're crazy," but with someone confidently overlaying your memory with theirs and insisting theirs is correct. It snowballed from there. When Christmas planning rolled around, I tried to be fair. "I want to spend Christmas Eve with my family, Christmas Day with yours, and maybe the day after, just the two of us," I suggested. "We never get any holiday time that isn't scheduled around extended family. It'd be nice to have one day to ourselves." He went rigid. "You know what this looks like, right?" he said. "You're trying to separate me from my family." I blinked. "Spending one day out of 3 alone is separating you from your family?" He crossed his arms. "Mom said this would happen. She warned me. First, she'll start chipping away at the holidays, then birthdays, then one day you'll wake up and realize you barely see us at all. She told me a woman who really respects family wouldn't try to renegotiate tradition." "She said that?" I asked, though of course she had. It sounded exactly like her. "Yeah," he said. "She's just looking out for me. She said, a wife who loves you brings you closer to your family, not further away. And look at what you're doing." I'd thought I was suggesting a compromise. He and his mother, by proxy, saw a long-term strategy to isolate him. My perfectly reasonable request mutated into Exhibit A in the case against me. Every attempt I made to address issues privately between us boomeranged back, heavier. "Please don't tell your mom the details when we argue," I said once. "It makes it hard for me to trust that what I tell you stays between." He came back days later with a rehearsed response. "Mom says people who hide relationship problems from family usually have something to feel guilty about. She thinks you're trying to keep her from seeing the real you." The real me, in her imagination, was jealous, controlling, manipulative. She said it so often, to him, to extended relatives, that the contour of that woman became more familiar to him than the wife who actually lived in his house. He began quoting her directly in fight, not even bothering to pretend the ideas were his. "Mom says you've been pulling away ever since I told you we should save more. Mom says you're trying to change me into someone I'm not. Mom says no woman who respects her marriage goes out past 10 with friends. Mom says you're trying to make me choose between you and her." Each "mom says" landed like a gavel. He didn't argue from his feelings. He argued from her authority. It was like trying to defend myself in a court where the judge was also the main witness against. One night, after a long day at work, I texted him that I was grabbing a quick drink with 2 coworkers, Jenna and Mark, before heading home. I sent a photo of my drink as proof of life, joked about needing social decompression time, and told him I'd be home by 9. When I walked in the door, his face was thunderous. "Where were you?" he demanded. "I told you," I said, taking off my shoes. "Work ran late, then I got drinks with Jenna and Mark." "I texted you," he snorted. "You expect me to believe that? Mom says if you're really just with coworkers, you invite your husband, or at least call. She says women who hide things always mention another woman to make it sound safer." I stared at him. "You think I'm cheating because I said my coworker's name?" "I think you're hiding things," he said. "Mom told me if she gets defensive, that's your answer right there. And look at you. You're freaking out." I wasn't. I was stunned, hurt, exhausted. But in the script he'd been handed, any protest was evident. Any boundary was control. Any alternate version of events was manipulation. The most suffocating part of being gaslit isn't the arguments themselves. It's the way you start doubting your own intentions. He stopped asking, "What did you mean?" and started announcing, "I know what you meant," as if he had superior access to my inner world via her. When I finally said, "I feel like your mother is in the middle of our marriage. I need you to talk to me," not through her, he didn't hear vulnerability. He heard confirmation. "There it is," he said, bitter triumph in his voice. "Mom warned me you'd try to turn me against her. She said, one day she'll make you pick sides. That's what controlling women do. You're proving her right." "I'm not making you choose," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm asking you to stop bringing her into every private moment. We're allowed to have our own space. You're trying to cut me off from the only person who's always been there for me," he shot back. "My mother wouldn't lie to me about you. She sees things you think you're hiding." His loyalty lay exposed in that one line. Not to the truth, not to us, to her. I kept trying anyway. Calm conversations, overnight letters I slipped under our bedroom door, lists of how I felt, written in my neatest handwriting, links to articles about boundaries, tearful late-night pleas for counseling. Every attempt at direct repair with him somehow ended up filtered through her before it boomeranged back to me sharpened. Mom says therapy is just a way for narcissists to turn their husbands into the bad guy. Mom says I need to be careful what I tell a counselor. They twist things. Mom says you're using all this psychological language to make her look crazy. By then, I could practically see the cycle. I'd speak. He'd leave. He'd call her. He'd come back with new lines, new angles, new realizations about who I really was. Her interpretations replaced my own. Her suspicions replaced his trust. Her voice, in the end, replaced mine. In that house with that man, I could scream the truth until my throat broke, and it would never compete with a whisper from her spoken miles. The day it all broke open, from covert to overt, from slow poison to clean cut, was ironically quiet. No neighbors craning their necks, no police, no dramatic shattered glass, just my suitcase, the cardboard box, the neat stack of papers, his mother sitting at my kitchen table like she owned the place. But that ambush, as devastating as it was also the beginning of something I didn't recognize, my exit from their script. Because once I was on the outside, my role shifted. I was no longer the defendant in their living room court. I became someone else entirely, a person with my own advisors, my own document, my own story to tell. The first weeks, though, I didn't know that. The first weeks, I was still fighting on their terms. After he threw me out, my phone became both my lifeline and my tormentor. I sent him long, spilling messages. Walls of text where I tried to reconstruct our whole marriage, point by point, to prove I was not who his mother said. I reminded him of Sundays in the kitchen, of the time I sat with him in the ER when he thought he was having a heart attack that turned out to be a panic attack. Of holidays I'd bent over backwards to make work for his family, of the ways we'd both failed and tried again. I apologized for things I hadn't done, for being too sensitive, for causing tension with his mom, for not understanding their bond. I offered to move closer to her, to change jobs, to cut back hours, to go to church with them more, to call her more myself. Please, I wrote over and over. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can talk to someone neutral. We owe our marriage that much, at least. Most of the time, my messages slid into the void. No read receipts, no typing dots, just silent. When he did respond, it was with sentences that felt eerily pre-written. Stop trying to manipulate. Mom said you'd do this. Cry. Promise to change. Play the victim. It's not working. This is exactly what abusers do. You're only upset because you got caught. Everything I did became part of their prophecy's fulfillment. Every tear was crocodile. Every attempt at connection was manipulation. Every suggestion of counseling was trying to control the narrative. The first time I brought up therapy, he replied, Mom says therapy is just for narcissists who want to make their husbands look crazy. I'm not going to pay someone to help you twist. It was like watching him surrender his own thought process in real time. I kept thinking, if I can just say the right combination of words, he'll snap out of it. If I can just explain it one more way, he'll remember who I actually am. Then one night, sitting on my friend's couch with swollen eyes and my phone in my shaking hand, my closest friend did what I hadn't been able to do for myself. She took the phone gently from my grip, set it on the table, and said, You need a lawyer. I don't want to fight him, I said immediately. I just want him back. I don't want this to get uglier. She looked at me with a mix of compassion and steel. He already made it ugly, she said. He hired a lawyer. He packed your bags. He's accusing you of cheating and financial abuse. This is not a rough patch. This is war. You don't need to attack him, but you do need to protect yourself from. The words protect myself felt foreign in my mouth. Up to that point, my job, as I understood it, had been to protect the relationship, protect his feelings, protect his mother's comfort. Protect myself had never made the list. Still, the next morning, with my stomach in knots, I booked a consultation with a divorce attorney. I walked into her office ready to beg her to tell me I was secretly the villain. That's how deep their narrative had sunk. I need you to be honest with me, I said. My ex and his mother say I'm manipulative and abusive. If that's true, I need to know. She didn't smile it away or rush to reassure me. She did something better. She started asking questions. How long has his mother been involved in your relationship? What kinds of things does he share with her? When did the accusations start? Do you have any documentation, texts, emails, financial records? When I told her about the mother-in-law's constant involvement, about my husband repeating her phrases word for word, about being accused with no chance to see this supposed proof, she said terms I'd never applied to my own life before. Enmeshment, she said. Triangulation. Emotional manipulation. But we're not here to diagnose anyone. We're here to deal with facts. Then, she told me the most pivotal sentence anyone said to me during that entire nightmare. In court, Mom said, is not evidence. Documents are, timelines are, behaviors are. If he wants to accuse you of cheating, stealing, abusing, he has to back that up with something real. Right now, you're trying to win him back with feeling. He's trying to win a case with a story. You need to stop arguing with his story and start building your own, with proof. Proof! It felt almost brutally cold, but within that coldness was something solid that I realized I'd been missing for months, a floor that didn't move when someone else spoke. She gave me homework, pull bank statements and credit card records for the last year. Download your pay stubs. Get your work schedules, time cards, key card logs, anything that shows where you actually were. Screenshot every single message from him and from his mother, if you have them. Write out a timeline. When did his behavior change? When did the mother's comments escalate? When was the first accusation? The second? The third? I went back to my friend's couch and opened my laptop. For the first time since I'd been thrown out, I did not text him. I logged into our bank instead. I printed pages and pages of statement, then sat on the floor with a highlighter, tracing every paycheck, every rent payment, every utility bill I'd paid, every purchase that could look suspicious out of context. I pulled my work emails for the nights he'd said I was out cheating, email timestamps, meeting invites, reports sent to supervisors. I requested my building access log. I took screenshots of every "I'm running late, here's why" message I'd sent him. Then I did something that nearly broke me. I printed my own texts to him. The long, breathless paragraphs, the repeated apologies, the strings of justifications. On the screen, they had felt necessary. On paper, they looked like a woman on her knees. I saw in black and white how many times I'd tried to explain the same simple truth. How many times I'd taken responsibility for his feeling or hers, as if I'd failed by not being able to soothe their anxiety. The good wife version of me, the one who was always smoothing things over, always trying to be understanding, always swallowing her own unease, had become my own worst enemy. That same reflex made me beg the very people harming me to stop. Building a case required a different reflex entirely. My lawyer gave me 3 simple communication rules that became, unexpectedly, emotional boundaries too. Don't respond in the heat of the moment. Wait, then keep it short and factual. Assume every message could be read in court. Let his words reveal who he is. Don't give him your emotional confession to twist. Don't argue the accusations by text. Say, "That's not accurate," or "I disagree," and bring your evidence to the table when it matters. So the next time he sent a long rant dragging out the link to the lifestyle and refusing to accept responsibility for what I did, I didn't send 3 screens of explanations. I wrote back, "Please direct all communication regarding the divorce to my attorney." When he tried to provoke me, "Mom says you're spreading lies about her. Be careful, that's defamation." I didn't tell him about all the nights I'd cried alone because I didn't want to start a war. I replied, "I am focused on resolving this legally. I will be by on date at time to collect my remaining belongings. Please have them accessible." He called me cold, calculating. His mother, I heard through mutual acquaintances, said I had finally shown my true colors. For the first time, I let them be wrong without sprinting to fix it. Getting a backbone did not look like dramatic confrontations or clever comebacks. It looked like refusing to meet him to talk things out, with her sitting beside him like a judge, saying, "I will not sign anything without my lawyer reviewing it," no matter how urgently they said they just wanted to get this over with. Letting go of the fantasy that he would wake up, see through her lies, apologize, and ask me to come home. Instead of trying to convince him I was good, I poured my energy into convincing myself I wasn't crazy. As I assembled folders and timelines, my life stopped feeling like a chaotic blur and started to look like a story with a beginning, a middle, and, eventually, an end that made sense. Patterns emerged, dates lined up, the accusations that had felt overwhelming turned, on paper, into absurdity. I began to see very clearly that I had not driven him to this. He and his mother had walked there willingly. Sitting across from him in mediation for the first time felt like meeting a stranger who happened to be wearing my husband's face. He was flanked by his lawyer on one side and his mother on the other. She was listed officially as his support person, but the way she leaned forward when he spoke, the way her eyes tracked every move, you would have thought she was the one being divorced. The mediator opened with her practiced script about working toward a fair resolution and keeping things civil. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips, but outwardly I was still. On the outside, I looked like a woman listening. Inside, I was bracing for impact. His lawyer laid out their claims like bullet points on a PowerPoint. Emotional abuse, he began. Attempts to isolate our client from his family support system. Financial manipulation. What we believe to be marital infidelity. Each phrase felt like a punch. Emotional abuse, isolation, infidelity. The exact words his mother had been using in her private smear campaign, now dressed up in legal language. He nodded along as the lawyer spoke, shoulders squared, like a man bravely telling his truth. Then it was my lawyer's turn. She didn't waste time arguing about who felt what. She clicked open our binder and turned to the first tab. "Let's address the financial manipulation allegation," she said calmly. "We have copies of the joint bank account statements for the past 12 months. If you turn to page 3, you'll see my client's salary deposits continuing regularly, bills being paid in both names, and no unexplained transfers to accounts solely in her name." She slid copies across the table. "We also have text messages from Date, where my client suggests adjusting the way expenses are split because she is concerned that he is carrying too heavy a portion of the bills. In response, he agrees. Those messages are highlighted here." The mediator read them, lips moving silently. "My words, his words, me. I want us to feel like a team with money. Him, you're right. We should balance this better." "Do you dispute the authenticity of these records?" the mediator asked, turning to his lawyer. He hesitated. "No," he said finally, "but my client's concern is less about what you can see on paper and more about her intent, her trying to set herself up. With respect," my lawyer cut in, "intent is difficult to prove without actions that support it. What we see here is a pattern of transparency and mutual decision-making about finances. If there is a specific transaction the mother believes was improper, we're happy to look at it. General concerns are not sufficient." For years, her concerns had been law in our home. Hearing someone calmly say they weren't enough was almost disorienting. Next up was the supposed affair. Opposing party alleges that my client had an inappropriate relationship with a coworker, my lawyer said, flipping to another tab. Specifically, that on Date, she stayed out late with this coworker and lied about being at work. She did, he said quickly. Mom saw the pictures. She told me. The mediator lifted a hand. We'll hear from your mother if necessary, she said. For now, let's see what's been submitted. My lawyer laid out a set of documents. This is my client's work schedule for that week, she said. You'll note she was scheduled on site until 9 p.m. We also have keycard logs from the building showing her entry at 8:12 a.m. and exit at 9:17 p.m. Additionally, here's an email she sent her supervisor at 9:23 p.m. that night from her desk, attaching a completed report. She held up a printed screenshot. This is the photo referenced, a group shot from a project wrap-up event held in their office break room at 7:42 p.m. Multiple coworkers are tagged. The mediator studied the picture. Me, holding a soda, in a circle of colleagues, including Mark. Our badges visible. Office wall art behind us. Do you have any other evidence of an affair? She asked his lawyer. Messages? Eyewitnesses? Anything to indicate a romantic relationship rather than a professional one? His lawyer shifted papers around. At this time, we're relying on the pattern my client and his mother have observed. So, nothing beyond this photo and their interpretation of it? The mediator clarified. A muscle in his mother's jaw jumped. We believe, his lawyer started. In this process, my lawyer said, still calm, belief must be supported by something. Right now, on the specific date cited, the documentation directly contradicts the allegation that she was out cheating instead of at work. The words hung there. Contradicts the allegation. The emotional abuse claim followed the same pattern. They said I'd attacked his relationship with his mother, that I'd tried to cut him off from essential support, that I'd created an atmosphere where he felt unsafe expressing his feelings. My lawyer opened to the next tab. Here, she said, are multiple text exchanges where my client proposes couples counseling to improve communication. In 3 separate threads, she also suggests family counseling to address ongoing boundary tensions with his mother. In these, she makes statements like, I don't want to take you away from your family. I just want us to have some privacy and our own space as a couple. The mediator read, eyebrows slightly furrowed, then looked up. Do you have any messages, she asked his side, or other documentation of her preventing contact with your family? For example, telling you that you're not allowed to see them, threatening consequences if you visit, intercepting calls, anything like that? His lawyer cleared his throat. It's more of a pattern, he repeated. His mother has felt. Then we may need his mother's account in more concrete form, my lawyer said. Names, dates, specific incident, and if these claims remain central, we may require her sworn testimony or a detailed affidavit. That single word, sworn, landed like a stone in still water. For the first time since I'd known her, his mother looked rattled. She had always held court in spaces where there were no transcripts. Living rooms, church lobbies, family group chats, places where reputation and tone meant more than dates and facts. Now the idea was being floated that she might have to write it all down, tie her stories to actual days on a calendar, answer follow-up questions, risk perjury if she embellished. I'm not the one on trial here, she snapped. No one is on trial, the mediator said. But if your statements are being used as the primary basis for serious allegations, they may need to be documented and, if necessary, examined. In our marriage, her opinions were unquestionable. In that room, they were just claims, subject to being tested, challenged, and, if found hollow, dismissed. Walking out of that first mediation session, I was shaky. It still hurt. I was still grieving, but for the first time, I felt something unfamiliar, but powerful. I was not crazy. I had not imagined the skew. I had not been too sensitive or overdramatic. I had been right. She had told stories about me that did not match reality. And now, finally, reality had a seat at the table. The end itself was almost absurdly quiet. No dramatic courtroom showdown, no judge slamming a gavel and declaring, "Sir, your mother's testimony is unreliable." Just an envelope in my mailbox with a stamp on it, reducing years of love, erosion, confusion, and conflict into a few typed lines. Grounds, irreconcilable differences. No mention of abuse, no official note of infidelity, no statement about me being a danger to anyone. After months of being told I was toxic, unstable, manipulative, fully expecting those words to show up in some legal description of me, it felt almost witchcraft-like to read such neutral language. We were, in the eyes of the law, exactly what I had been insisting we were. Two people whose relationship had broken down, not a monster and her victim. His mother had expected a different kind of ending. In her fantasy, this divorce was going to be her vindication. The world would see, finally, what she saw. Her son bravely escaping the clutches of an evil wife. She would be the hero who'd saved him. The judge would, in some imagined way, validate her years of warning. What actually happened was something much quieter and, ironically, much more damaging to her authority. Throughout the process, every time one of her claims encountered a requirement for proof, it either fizzled or had to be watered down. They'd claimed I'd cleaned him out, but the settlement was standard. Joint assets divided. No big, shocking transfer to me. No hidden stash uncovered. The accusatory phrase, financial abuse, never made it into the final paperwork. They'd framed me as isolating him from his family, but the only written evidence anyone could find were my texts suggesting counseling and asking for boundaries. In the end, the narrative softened to communication issues. They'd painted a picture of ongoing infidelity, but with actual dates, times, and logs on the table, the cheating allegation went from a central theme to an awkward footnote. At one point, after another round of document review, his own lawyer looked resigned. "Given the lack of tangible evidence," he said, "we're not going to pursue the adultery claim as a formal ground. It complicates things, and we can't substantiate it." I watched my ex's face when he heard that. Confusion, embarrassment, a sliver of doubt. His mother had spoken about my affair like it was undisputed fact. She'd built entire rants on it. But now, the professional he was paying to represent him was effectively saying, "We can't prove what your mother believes. We're dropping it." "But Mom saw," he began. His lawyer cut him off carefully. "What your mother believes she saw and what a court can accept as evidence are two different things," he said. That distinction, that gap between her convictions and reality, started to ripple outward. After the divorce, his mother continued telling her version of the story at family events and in group chat. I was still, in her words, the woman who had used him, lied to him, almost ruined him. The difference now was that there was a public record quietly contradicting her. When she told relatives she took him for everything he had, they could see that he still had his car, a portion of the savings, his retirement accounts, and no obligation to support me beyond what was typical. When she insinuated I'd been violent, "You don't know what I've seen," she'd say ominously. Those same relatives noticed there was no restraining order filed, no findings of abuse, no supervised anything. At a family barbecue months later, one of his aunts, who'd initially taken his mother at her word, pulled him aside. I wasn't there, but the conversation was relayed to me almost verbatim by someone who overheard. "I thought she stole from you," the aunt said, "but your settlement was even, wasn't it?" He shifted. Well, yeah, but that's because, and I thought she was dangerous, the aunt continued. Didn't your mom say she was scared of her? But there's no, what do they call it? Protective order? Nothing like that. He didn't have an answer, because there wasn't one. His mother's image, which had once been polished to a saintly shine, started to show hairline fractures. Not because I went on a campaign to expose her, but because the things she said out loud didn't match the things people could verify if they were paying attention. Some relatives stayed firmly in her corner, some avoided taking a stance, but more than a few began to watch her with new wariness. One cousin later told me, I still love her, but I saw how far she was willing to go to be right about you. And it hit me that if she ever decided I was the problem, she'd do it to me too. Even her relationship with her son wasn't untouched. He had what he wanted on paper, a divorce, his assets divided, his freedom restored. What he didn't get was the clean hero narrative he'd been promised. There was no legal stamp over my head reading dangerous. There was no judicial declaration that he had escaped an abuser. He was left instead with something squirmier, a permanent file saying essentially, 2 adults couldn't make it work. I heard through mutual friends that he started getting irritated when she brought me up. Just drop it, Mom, portedly snapped once, leaving the room mid-rant. That might not sound like much, but for a man who'd built his whole self-concept around pleasing her, it was seismic. I don't know if he will ever fully untangle what was his decision and what was her projection. That's his journey now, not mine. What I do know is this: the divorce that was supposed to be her triumph, her proof that she'd been right about me all along, ended up documenting in quiet but unerasable ways how wrong she'd been. It forced her stories into a space where, because I said so, wasn't enough, and it forced me to finally step out of the frame she'd drawn me in and see myself clearly. When the final decree came and the adrenaline finally drained, I found myself face to face with something I hadn't had in years, my own mind without their voices buzzing inside it. Silence is disorienting when you've been living in constant defense. I'd wake to no new accusations and still feel my body brace. A car door slamming outside my apartment would send my heart racing, certain they'd shown up to confront me with some new piece of evidence. Without the daily crisis to focus on, a different kind of pain surfaced. Maybe they were right about me. Maybe I really was selfish. Maybe I did poison his relationship with his family. Maybe I've just rewritten the story in my head to avoid seeing who I am. Internalized blame doesn't yell. It whispers in your own voice. Even with the neutral divorce decree in my hand and a lawyer affirming that the case against me had been hollow, I kept combing through my memories for proof that I was the villain they needed me to be. Therapy wasn't about healing at first. It was about cross-examining myself. I need you to be honest, I told my therapist in our first session. If I'm the abusive one, if I'm manipulative like they say, I need to know so I don't do this to someone else. She didn't rush to tell me, of course you're not. That would have felt like just another voice to doubt. Instead, she asked questions. How did he respond when you set boundaries? What happened when his mother crossed a line and you named it? How often were your needs reframed as attack? Who benefited from you doubting your memory all the time? As I described his mother's constant involvement, my husband's deference to her, the way my words were routinely twisted into something darker, she offered terms: enmeshment, triangulation, gaslighting, not as labels to throw at them, but as frameworks to understand myself. Being in that kind of dynamic, she said, doesn't just mess with how others see you, it messes with how you see you. Part of healing is separating their projections from your identity. Outside of those sessions, I started writing. At first, my journal was just a dump. Raw, vengeful sentences like, I hate them, and repetitive questions like, why didn't I leave sooner? But over time, I used it differently. I wrote down specific events. The night his mother rearranged our kitchen without asking, the first time he checked my phone, the mediation, the aunt's questions afterward. Then, beneath each entry, I asked myself, if a friend told me this story, what would I think of her? Would I call a woman manipulative for asking her husband to stop telling his mother every detail of their sex life? No. Would I call her controlling for wanting one holiday out of 3 alone as a couple? No. Would I call her abusive for asking his mother to call before dropping by? No. Every time, looking at the story from the outside, my verdict on myself was kinder than theirs had ever been. I started to see the woman I'd been in that marriage with clearer eyes, someone who had bent herself into shapes to be nice, understanding, not dramatic, until she barely recognized her own reflection. Slowly, that version of me began to loosen her grip, making space for someone different to emerge, someone who could hear a red flag and not argue it into pale pink, someone who could say, I'm not comfortable with that, and not follow it with a paragraph of justification. Someone who could see triangulation happening and step out of the triangle instead of dancing faster. Healing wasn't just big breakthroughs, it was tiny acts of rebellion. Buying a bright, too loud couch and putting it front and center in my new living room. Cooking meals the way I liked them without wondering whether they met some imaginary good wife standard approved by a mother-in-law committee. Taking a solo trip and enjoying the quiet of a hotel room without being accused of sneaking around. It was choosing friends who didn't require me to earn their belief. The coworker who said I was at that event, no one was flirting with anyone, and refused to entertain his mother's story. The cousin who admitted, I never fully bought what she said about you, but I didn't know how to say it then. I'm sorry. The friend who physically took my phone away when she realized I was drowning in my own defenses. Their reflections helped recalibrate my own mirror, but the most radical shift came when I stopped basing my worth on whether anyone else believed me. For a long time, I thought my options were clear my name in their eyes or live forever under their verdict. What I eventually realized is that there's a third path. You can walk out of their story altogether. You can decide that they are allowed to be wrong about you, that their misunderstanding, their gossip, their embellished narratives say more about them than they ever will about you. You can build a life where your reality is the default, not the defense. Mine doesn't revolve around being the good ex-wife or convincing his extended family that I was innocent all along. Some of them still think I'm the villain. That used to keep me up at night. Now, it's background noise because I know what that divorce really did. He believed his mother's lies and threw me out. That is absolutely true. But what they thought would be my undoing ended up documenting the truth in ways their gossip never could. It pulled their suspicions into the light and asked, "Can you prove this?" And over again, the answer was no. Their world tilted too. Her control wasn't as absolute as she imagined. His version of events wasn't as unassailable. And my identity ended up attached not to their whispers, but to a reality that stood up under scrutiny. If you're where I was, standing in a triangle, trying to shout your way into being seen, hear this. You are not crazy. You are not alone. You are allowed to stop fighting for a place in a story that was rigged against you from the beginning. You are allowed to keep your evidence, protect your heart, make your plans, and walk. You are allowed to believe yourself, even if they never do.